I'm consuming, because as you can see, you just have to keep dipping. A lot of these that have just a little bit on them, they've already been dipped like 20 times. So after the hog killing, for example, they would use those kettles for the hog killing, as well as cane, making syrup, cane grindings. And they'd scald the hog, get the hide off of them, and then process them, and they would save all the fat. And either they used them as, like Leslie mentioned in her demonstration, used it to make soap, or they'd use them to make candles. So they really had to utilize all of their resources, and they had to be very self-sufficient. And they had to have lots of time. Leslie, you want to add anything about the candles? They also would use cattails, because they would dip the cattails in the lard and use that as a torch.
They used a lot of beeswax too, because they did have honeybees. They did have bees.
Did anybody keep bees on Honey Island, or so they cultivated those bees, or were they just wild?
No, they were wild.
And there's some people that say that one way that they would collect the bees is that when they saw the wild bees coming up, they would throw flour in the air, and then the flour would land on the bees, and then they would follow the bees to their hives, and then they'd rob the hive.
That's what happened to a lot of the bees on Honey Island. They would rob those bees and take them to their homesteads and put them in man-made environments.
Yeah, and of course, a lot of people didn't have access to, maybe they didn't use candles, and they just kept their fireplace going for their light. And then just put it out. They'd start it in the morning, cook on it, and then try to keep it going.
Is he coming?
And it'd pretty much run all day. And the females, the women, did a lot of not only the cooking, but a lot of the farming.
Okay. I wanted to talk with you. I'll talk.
And especially like with the Indians,
the
the women took care of the children and the garden while the men were out hunting. And with the Native Indians, their garden would have been, it was called a three-sister garden. And so it would have been like beans, corn, and squash, and they'd plant the corn and let it get up, and then they'd run the beans around the corn stalks, and then they would plant the squash, and that would be the Three Sisters garden. And the Three Sisters were also their gods, if you will, that protected them. And later on this afternoon, if you're around to make the corn husk dolls, you'll hear the story of why the corn husk dolls don't have a face.
It wouldn't hurt. No. We got some.
Yeah, and we should have counted, because it takes about 20 dips just to get a little bit of wax on the candles. That one's looking good. And this is 18 ply. Is this 18 ply on the wick?
That's a good question.
What'd they make the wick out of?
Well, they made it out of yarn. This has probably got a little bit of polyester in it, something that gives it a little bit more strength. But the width of your candle, the diameter of your candle, determines the size of the wick that you'll need. So that particular size wick is going to produce a taper like the one that's finished on the top rack.
Like this, and you can see we're a good ways away. And as it cools too, it makes it, yes. Yes. Yeah. And so the pioneers, they really worked from, you know, pre-dawn till dusk.
But they made it into a fun occasion. A lot of the work that had to be done, a lot of hands were needed. So when it came time for a hog butchering, they would often make candles and soap. They would come from all around. Families would help one another with this so that they could get the work done faster. Corn husking, barn raising, syrup making, all of these things that required a lot of time and a lot of hands went a whole lot faster when you had everybody joining in together a particular time of the year. Now in the evening when the work was done, they would go to a big barn and have a square dance. They called this a frolic. Now, not only did they frolic when it was time to work at the end of the day, on the weekend when they went to church, and that was about once a month because it was so far to these churches, and they also rotated preachers from one church to the next because there weren't that many preachers. But they would go to church for 2 days, Saturday and Sunday. But on Saturday night, they would have a frolic. And that was the time for the young people in the area to have contact with other folks besides their immediate and extended families. So work was made fun, church was made fun, and this is how the young people had contact and hopefully would meet a future mate. Now your wax needs to be no hotter than 200 degrees or it won't get firm fast. It doesn't need to be any lower than 165 degrees. So somewhere within that range, 165 to 200, you should be able to produce some good candles. And this is pure paraffin, like Kathi said. It's not beeswax. We didn't add any lard, but you can. Beeswax is really expensive. But for the pioneers, it would have been accessible and something that they would have done as opposed to the paraffin wax. No electricity ever in any of the homes throughout the Okefenokee Swamp, ever. They relied mainly on propane and on kerosene. Now there is a telephone inside the Highsmith cabin. That's a little misleading. There were no telephones ever in the Okefenokee Swamp. Their main source of communication was hollering. And they had different hollers that meant different things. You might be in trouble. You might be getting close to the house after a long day of hunting and fishing and you want some supper on the table. Or you might just be happy. And it's bad manners in the swamp if somebody hollers and you don't holler back to let them know that you heard them, okay? Those candles are looking good.
Yeah,
They really are.
yeah.
Now, while we're watching these candles grow, just for your information, this kind of setup here would not only be used for melting wax for candle making, it's also used for making soap. Now, pioneers would have put all of their soap making ingredients into a big pot like this. First of all, they'd fill it up about halfway full of lard. Then they would dump in an equal amount of water. And then here's the fun part. They would get a can of what you call Red Devil lye. Now they could leach their own. They didn't have to get it from the store. But about the 1880s, they could buy it and did. And they would put in a whole can of that Red Devil lye. Now the way they knew that they were using enough lye is it would literally disintegrate the pieces of meat in the lard that they had been saving for their soap making. And so that lard literally ate up the meat. And now the lard that we're going to use today when we make soap shortly, that lard has never been cooked in, so there's no pieces of meat going to come up in it. But pioneers didn't care, and it turned out some pretty effective lye soap, like this. This was made using this kind of a setup and those ingredients: lard, water, and lye. And it takes about 4 hours to constantly keep this pot of ingredients stirred to the point where it's ready to set up. And when the ingredients start looking like lumpy pudding, then it's time to start taking the mixture out and putting it into molds. Now, pioneers didn't have fancy silicone molds like we do. They had big wooden crates, and they would scoop all of that soap into the crate and let it sit for 24 hours. The next day, it would be set up firmly enough that they could cut their soap into what you call cakes. We would say bars. And then you let your soap cure for 3 weeks. And at the end of that time, you got some good soap for washing your body, scrubbing the floor, and washing clothes. Now sometimes what the pioneers turned out wasn't nice and firm like this. It was kind of runny because they eyeballed what they threw in the pot. They didn't measure it so carefully, but they'd use it anyway. Looking good over there, girls.
Look at that, isn't that cute?
Yeah. So again, I'll be making soap over here around 1 o'clock if you're interested. I'm not going to be using this hot process, the Pioneer process today, because we're using that for the candle making. I'll be doing a process that you can do at home yourself, and it won't be ugly like this, it'll be pretty. So 1 o'clock we'll be making some soap, cold process.
And whenever you want to, we can move to the pots over there and if it's
Is it time?
I need to run over there to the.
49, Kathy.
Okay, I just need to do one thing before
Okay.
so that we're ready.